Funding for Shaperillis is provided by
Squarespace, the sponsor of today's video. For a while now, I've been thinking about ranking some director filmographies since the animation studio well is starting to run dry. And I figured a good way to ease my audience into that would be Steven Spielberg, since he's made a ton of iconic and acclaimed blockbuster films most people know about. But then I saw Asteroid City, and it really got me on a Wes Anderson kick, which led to me thinking, hey, he's only made 11 movies. That's a lot quicker and easier than Spielberg's 10,000. Why don't we start with him instead? And I'm really glad I made that decision because Wes Anderson is easily one of my favorite directors. I'm sure most of you can recognize his signature style when you see it, even if you haven't watched any of his movies. His shots are intricately composed, his characters are often deadpan in their delivery, and the colors, oh man do they go insane in his films. He's kind of a divisive director, with a ton of people saying, oh, he just makes the same movie over and over again. He had a good thing going with his earlier films, but now he is too focused on his style and not enough on the humanity of his characters. You can have those opinions if you want, but I'm just gonna go ahead and warn you, this video is absolutely not for you. Because I'm obsessed with his style. And I think his films are all distinct from each other in terms of story and tone. And for the first time in any film ranking I've ever done on this channel, I don't think there's a single bad movie to talk about today. He hasn't made one. The bottom 3 on this list are 6 out of 10s in my eyes, and that's the lowest he's ever gone. I mean, even Studio Ghibli made a cinematic disaster for God's sake. When I tell you this was the easiest movie marathon I've ever done for a video, I'm not joking. The thing that was a lot harder was figuring out how to rank these films. I went back and forth more than I've ever done on any other video. And ultimately, you might not like the ranking I ended up with. Riots will occur. Trees will get blown up. Cats will get thrown out the window. It's gonna be chaos. Or maybe you guys will be cool with it because I'm ranking films mostly made for adults, and thus the comment section will reflect that. I don't know, I guess we'll just jump in and find out. Let's go ahead and talk about Wes's weakest movie, which is still okay, so I guess I can't really use disappointment in the game of life. Be a winner at the game of life. Bottle Rocket is one of the weirdest viewing experiences I've ever had. I heard going in that Wes Anderson's first ever feature film didn't really have much of the usual style we associate him with. But that didn't make it any less of a shock when I realized just how normal this movie looks. It's just deadass a normal fucking movie. Like, I can't stress enough how weird that is for a project with his name on it. There are brief glimpses of the writer and director he would eventually become. Like when one of the characters gets offended over what a little girl thinks of him, and another says, what has she ever accomplished in her life? And there's a nice, well-edited and shot scene where 4 characters are testing out guns. Stuff like this feels like beta Wes Anderson. A few little tastes of him starting to spread his wings and become the impeccably unique filmmaker we all know and love. You don't just come out of the womb making movies on the same filmmaking caliber as his later features. So it was especially neat to see how he got his start with this pretty decent little film. It has a fun premise and great lead performances by Owen and Luke Wilson, in their acting debuts no less. But for the most part, I just kinda found it okay, and it didn't leave a huge impression on me. It's a crime film with only 2 real heists in it, one in the first half and one at the very end, and those parts are pretty enjoyable and comedic. But the downtime in between is kinda hit or miss. I think there's a sweet relationship between Luke Wilson and this motel maid he meets, but at the same time, the plot really stalls when they're at this motel. The pacing in this movie is generally kind of off, and sometimes it doesn't feel like there's enough going on to justify the short 90-minute runtime. But ultimately, I like the central characters and how their relationship gets tested, and as a result, I think this is a fine enough movie. Not one I ever think I'll watch again, but it's certainly a neat novelty when compared to the rest of Wes's filmography. Isle of Dogs is kind of a weird one for me. This was actually the first Wes Anderson movie I ever saw in theaters. I went with 3 of my college roommates, and while they all really enjoyed it, I was alone in thinking it was just kind of okay. And rewatching it again for the first time 5 years later, yep, it sure still is okay. There's a lot to love about this movie, but also a lot of stuff I don't really vibe with. See, a common criticism of modern Wes Anderson movies is that he's become a parody of himself. But I don't think that really applies to stuff like Grand Budapest Hotel, The French Dispatch, or Asteroid City. They all have his trademark style in terms of visuals and writing, but they still feel very genuine in their execution. They aren't parodies in the slightest. But this one, I can kinda see it in some areas. Like, this movie's about a gang of 5 dogs, except not actually. It's about one dog, and the other 4 just kind of follow him around to say Wes Anderson dialogue and not do much else. And they're all voiced by typical Wes Anderson actors: Bob Balaban, Edward Norton, Bill Murray, Jeff Goldblum. Their vocal performances don't really add anything to these characters. It's just like, yep, this is the Wes Anderson gang doing the typical Wes Anderson routine. It just didn't really work for me. The main dog is played by Bryan Cranston, who had never appeared in a Wes movie before this, which makes his performance feel a little more genuine than the others. His arc of going from a stray dog only looking out for himself to caring for this kid who comes to the dog island is decent, but it's also really predictable. I feel like this would have been okay if they didn't play it up so much. Like, I don't sit, I don't fetch, I'm a lone wolf dog, Jesse, I'm never gonna be a domesticated pet. It's like, come on, man, we know you're gonna start caring for this kid and want to protect him. The movie just doesn't feel very self-aware about how predictable its main relationship is. Don't get me wrong, it has plenty of genuinely sweet moments, but for the most part, it's like, yep, this is a character arc, and it's fine, whatever. There's some other stuff I didn't really care for, like Walter White dog meets a Scarlett Johansson dog. They have literally one scene together, and then at the end they're a couple. Huh? It just kind of feels lazy. Like, why even put a romance between these dogs in the movie if you're gonna half-ass it? Speaking of half-assing a romance, so there's this foreign exchange student from Ohio, played by Greta Gerwig, my queen, and she's kinda leading the charge against the Japanese prime minister who exiled all the dogs under false pretenses. Her scenes ultimately do not matter to the arc of the film. But aside from that, I just find it so odd that the person who needs to spur the societal change and free Japan from this guy's evil ambitions is a random white lady. A ton of people found this movie really weird in terms of how it depicts Japanese culture, since the Japanese characters aren't the focus compared to the dogs, who are primarily voiced by white actors. It's a valid criticism to bring up, but, you know, if you want to make a movie focused on dogs that just happens to take place in Japan, then whatever, that's fine, I guess. But I really can't begin to understand why we needed a white woman to center the human storyline around. What was stopping this character from just being a native Japanese person? It's so weird and so unnecessary. But that's not even getting into the fact that she falls in love with the boy who goes to the dog island in search of his lost pup. These two characters don't even meet until the climax, but yep, they're a couple now. Why? I mean, at least she's not 17 while he's 12. Yeah, Tracy is probably my least favorite character in any Wes Anderson movie. It's the only time in recorded history when Greta Gerwig has made a movie worse. Seriously, she's amazing. You gotta watch Lady Bird and Little Women if you loved Barbie. Alright. Didn't I say this movie was okay? Well, that's because there's a lot of good stuff to balance out the bad. The star of the show here is obviously the visuals, which I feel are even better looking and more ambitious than Fantastic Mr. Fox. I feel like everybody talks about how good the sushi scene looks, but I gotta throw my hat into the ring and say, yes, I also think the sushi scene looks really good. Thank you, Wes, for that scene specifically. I also really like how whenever there's a screen in the movie, it displays the image as traditional 2D animation rather than stop motion. That's just cool. This is a cool looking movie. I dig it. The premise is also a really creative and good one, saying a lot about the dangers of propaganda and government conspiracies by using robot dogs and other kooky elements. There's a lot of fun gags, like this one oracle dog who can predict the future, but really they're just the only dog able to understand TV. Or this group of cannibal dogs who, as it turns out, are offended to be called such. There's some pretty good humor, and it's creative, and it's visually stunning. It's far from a bad movie despite my issues with it, but I don't really know anyone who would rank this as one of Wes's best, even if they do like it. There's simply a lot of competition. But to be fair, all those other Wes Anderson movies don't have a Walter White dog who calls another dog a son of a bitch, so this movie gets bonus points for that.
In the fire of water.
The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou is a bit of a black sheep, getting pretty mixed reviews when it initially came out. Oh no, it's the only Wes Anderson movie that's certified rotten! Because that means something to some people apparently. Nah, I think this is a perfectly fine movie, even bordering on good. It's just not a super memorable one for me. Bill Murray plays an oceanographer who lost his best friend to a jaguar shark, and the movie documents his quest to find it and get revenge, all as he starts reconnecting with his son, Owen Wilson. And the first thing I didn't really vibe with is the two lead performances. I wasn't really impressed with Bill Murray in this film. I know deadpan humor is what he's known for, but a lot of this performance blew past deadpan and more so felt disinterested to me. He has his moments, but I think his character is one of my least favorite protagonists in any Wes movie. And then there's Owen Wilson, who's mostly fine, except he puts on this southern accent and keeps dipping in and out of it as the movie goes on. And I don't know, it really gets on my nerves when that happens in movies. On the flip side of the coin, you got Willem Dafoe doing a German accent as this wholesome, overeager crew member. And he's a delight. Easily my favorite character in the film. In this role, he's not just Willem Dafoe, he's Willem da Friend. I would gladly welcome a spin-off about him. Make it happen, Wesley. Jeff Goldblum is also great as this douchey rival to Bill Murray. And Cate Blanchett is really endearing as this reporter who goes along for the journey. It's decent, it's a fun little misadventure, and there are plenty of humorous character moments and unexpected hijinks, like a sudden violent pirate attack. It was kind of out of nowhere tonally, but I don't know, I kind of appreciate how balls to the wall surreal it felt. Eventually though, I was kinda ready for the film to wrap up. To this day, this is Wes's longest film at 118 minutes, and I feel like it could have been 20 minutes shorter. Even so, the scene where they do get to the shark was well worth reaching. It's pretty subtly powerful, and definitely my favorite scene in the movie. Overall, a decent watch. I might try and check it out again at some point. But one viewing is probably enough for a while. If it had better central characters and the story was a bit tightened up, I'd probably enjoy it a lot more. But it's definitely not a bad film. Calm your pants, critics from 2004.
What's my motivation?
Alright, now we're getting into the good stuff. Asteroid City is the most recent Wes Anderson feature, and it's perhaps his densest and most layered to date, both in terms of its themes and the way the story is presented. I mean, within the film, the main story that takes place in Asteroid City is all just a play, and said play is being presented to us in a documentary feature narrated by Walter White. It's a cool way to present a story to us, but it's also a method for Wes Anderson to make something much more introspective and self-aware than his previous works. The in-universe actors continually question the playwright and ask, what's the meaning of this scene? Why are we doing the things we're doing? I don't want to speculate too much, but I imagine these are the kind of questions Wes himself got on set a couple times, before everyone just started trusting in his idiosyncratic process. Oftentimes, the playwright in the story doesn't even know the meaning of certain scenes. He just puts them in because they feel right, and he figures he can always find the meaning later or let others interpret what it means. That's pretty clever and true to life, and I think the play framing device is easily one of the best parts of this movie. There's a ton of really good stuff in the Asteroid City storyline itself, of course. I feel like any young child in this movie is just hysterical. From the students of this school teacher to especially these morbid triplets who crack me up every time they say something. There's this quirky motel manager played by Steve Carell. Never thought I'd see him in a Wes Anderson movie. Speaking of people I never thought I'd see in a Wes Anderson movie, Tom Hanks. I don't know why, but seeing a movie star on his caliber working within the meticulous confines of Westworld was just really fascinating. It felt like an interesting crossover, even though it's as simple as just a writer and director I haven't seen paired together before. And Tom Hanks is great in this. Though I think a lot of that is just relief that he's in a better movie than Elvis and Pinocchio 2022. I like the alien design, even though it kind of just looks like the blackface demon from Smiling Friends. I don't know, it was neat. The colors and shots are good. I don't even know if I need to say that because that's just kind of a given for Wes, but yeah, it looks fantastic. Overall, it's a really good movie, but I feel like there's a couple things holding it back from being a great one. So, it seems pretty agreed upon that the main metaphor for this movie is that being stuck in Asteroid City and unable to leave represents being unable to process grief. Jason Schwartzman lost his wife, but he keeps his emotions bottled up inside and doesn't want to talk about it. That's a solid metaphor, and yet, I just don't find myself connecting with or getting emotional over his grief. Part of that is because of how unaffected by it he is on the outside. I mean, he's somewhat close to tears in a few scenes. He seems rather depressed. The feelings of grief are there. I just don't get the emotion I want out of him. But you might be saying, well, that's the point, right? That's his character flaw. Scarlett Johansson literally tells him that he's unable to open up about this. And yeah, you're right. That's the obvious intent of the character. And I feel like if that was the sole focus of the film, if it was just about this one guy trapped by this overwhelming feeling of nothingness, then it could have been much better fleshed out and resonant. But he's not the sole focus. And that leads into my biggest problem with the film. I'm gonna be real with you, this movie has too many damn characters. This is one of the biggest ensembles Wes has ever had in a movie, and it drags the focus of this film in all sorts of directions that don't mesh the best tonally. There's a romance between Schwartzman's son and Johansson's daughter that doesn't really feel that unique or special. There's a ton of scenes with Maya Hawke teaching this class and her kinda sorta falling in love with a cowboy, and they don't really go anywhere. There's these smart kids who leak the alien story to the outside world, and it doesn't really feel like there are that many consequences for doing that. Steve Carell is trying to sell real estate in a couple scenes. There's this scientist who's in like 2 scenes, but she also wants to help the kids reach the alien. And this isn't even taking into account the outside layer of the film with the play. We get tons of scenes with the actors who play these characters. Not the real life actors, but the characters they portray in the film Asteroid City, who portray characters in the play Asteroid City within the film Asteroid City. Are you following so far? There's just so much in this movie. So many scenes that, while charming, don't necessarily connect to anything else and drag the pace of the movie down considerably. It's rather slow and not a ton happens plot-wise. And while I still mostly enjoyed every scene, I couldn't help but picture a version of this movie that was just about Jason Schwartzman learning to trust Scarlett Johansson enough to open up about his grief, on top of keeping the play within a movie element, since those were also worthwhile. It just feels like the main character doesn't get much focus thanks to this film's nature as an ensemble piece. And if he did and was better fleshed out as a result, I feel like the central message of the film, that you can't wake up if you don't fall asleep, would have been stronger. I mean, there is value to the ensemble here. They provide an adequate secondary moral about trying to process your place in the universe after an earth-shattering event. But I don't really know. I'm gonna be totally honest, I might have missed something because, like I said, this is easily the densest and hardest to unpack out of all of Wes's features. Like, initially I was disappointed with the climax of the play sort of being dismissed in favor of following the perspective of the actor playing the lead. While I don't mind too much because it leads to the scene with Margot Robbie, which is the best and most emotional scene in the movie, it kind of makes the Asteroid City plotline meaningless since we don't get to see its climax. And yes, it wasn't an accident that I used the word meaningless. I mean, that's the point, right? That there is no point? That trying to derive meaning out of this story and how it wraps up is a fool's errand? It just is the way it is. There's no reason for it. I thought this was just gonna be a cute little alien movie, but now my brain hurts. Ultimately, while I haven't been able to stop thinking about this movie and all of its layers since I first saw it, I would sooner rewatch any of the movies ranked above it. This one is really good, but it's a little too unfocused, feels a little bit like it squandered some of its potential, and quite frankly, this guy just has a stacked filmography, so there's absolutely no shame in being ranked this low. Glad other people adore this one. Maybe I'll get on your level of enjoyment after like 5 more rewatches and 30 more analysis videos breaking down the crucial significance of the real estate vending machine.
Who hit you?
Run away with me.
Moonview Highway is a cute-ass movie. Possibly Wes's cutest of all time, in fact. It's just 2 crazy kids falling in love and running away. There's not a whole lot to analyze, and not a hint of pretension or cynicism either. It's just a nice, breezy, enjoyable watch. The 2 leads are great together, and I'm super into the understated magic of the first half, where they're just trying to exist in love while all the other characters are after them. It's nice, it's genuine, the score is great, it's well edited and well shot, and the movie's color scheme does a great job at matching its almost dreamlike quality. However, I don't like the second half quite as much. Don't get me wrong, it's very fun. After the movie slows down for some character moments, the third act is non-stop madcap hijinks as the kids and adults end up in a wacky, lightning-filled chase scene. But at this point, our 2 leads don't really get to talk that much to each other or in general. And I don't know, I kinda missed the focus on their romance that dominated the first half. On top of that, while I love all the kid characters in this, from the main couple to the band of scouts chasing them, the adult characters are kinda weak in my opinion. Okay, I take that back. Edward Norton as the quirky scoutmaster is an absolute delight. But the girl's parents, played by Bill Murray and Frances McDormand, aren't super interesting. They're just going through typical marital troubles, especially since the wife is having an affair with this officer played by Bruce Willis. And he's probably the most underwhelming part of this film. The performance is fine, but for what's essentially meant to be the adult lead, he's not really an interesting character. I don't really know enough about him to buy the connection he's supposed to have with the boy. And I feel like I should have been more emotionally affected when he offers to adopt him at the end. It's like, okay, they only had one conversation with each other and it wasn't a particularly interesting one. But I guess it solves the problem of the boy not having a family, so sure, this is as good a solution as any. I don't know, it could have been a really nice and heartwarming moment. But instead I was just like, yeah, that's cool, and moved on with my life. It really says a lot that despite this being my third time watching the film, I actually completely forgot Bruce Willis's character existed going into this rewatch. I mean, the Jason Schwartzman cameo left more of an impression on me. But I don't want to discourage you from checking out what's ultimately a really great, beautiful as hell little film. It's not Wes's best, but I don't think I'd ever object to rewatching it. It's some good stuff.
About a journey of self-improvement. And you came to India.
I didn't really know what to expect out of Darjeeling Limited going in. It's not really talked about that much in a positive light, like a lot of his films from Fantastic Mr. Fox onward. But it also doesn't have that slightly negative reputation that lingers around Life Aquatic. So, I gave it a watch, and honestly, it's really great. Probably one of his most underrated, in fact. It's a bit of an outlier because style-wise, it's a bit toned down from the direction Royal Tenenbaums and Life Aquatic were going in. I guess he was saving up all his style points for Mr. Fox. Don't get me wrong, there's colorful sets and good camera work, just nothing all that crazy. And another thing that makes it kind of an outlier is the cast size. Most of these movies are filled with large ensembles, usually with the same handful of actors. But here, the focus is really just on these three brothers. Most of the movie is just Jason Schwartzman, Adrian Brody, and Owen Wilson. And I kind of find that refreshing. When the movie opened up with Bill Murray, I was like, oh great, him again. You have to understand, I watched this less than 12 hours after Life Aquatic, so at this point, I was pretty sick of Bill Murray. But then it turns out that was just a cameo. This movie is deadass just about these three dudes who have great chemistry thanks to top-notch writing and performances. I think in particular, this is probably my favorite Owen Wilson performance, Wes Anderson movie or not. Yeah, I know, it even topped Cars, can you believe it? Side note, this movie came out 1 year after Cars, so I just like imagining him stepping into the recording booth to say ka-chow 50 times, and then leaving and going, okay, let me read this script where I'm a physically and emotionally broken man, desperate to reconnect with the only family I have left after the loss of our father. Wow. This is a far more character-driven film than it is plot-driven, but I didn't mind. I was always engaged by these really good characters who are reluctant to open up to each other and stay together as a family. It's a bit slight, I suppose. Like, it's not the most emotionally groundbreaking thing in the world. And there's another movie of his in particular that explores family and grief a bit better. Plus, you know, it's a movie about three white dudes trying to find themselves in India. And since Wes is indeed the whitest director alive, India definitely comes across as more of a backdrop for the main characters to work through their struggles in. Nothing about this film seemed offensive, especially compared to some aspects of Isle of Dogs. But, you know, I'm not really someone qualified to tell. Ultimately, the film is focused on these three brothers, and that story is great. Pretty low-key and understated, but a very nice and digestible watch. I don't really have too much more to say about it. I just think it's very underrated, and you should give it a watch if you haven't. Okay, we're halfway through the list, so now it's time to check out Battle Mode. Wait, no it's not. Sorry, I forgot what it was like to rank movies instead of Mario Kart courses. Oh yeah, there is something I can do here in the middle though. Ranking these Roald Dahl adaptation short films that were unceremoniously dropped on Netflix a few months back. It's interesting how Wes chose to abandon the anthology format of French Dispatch, and instead allowed these to all exist as their own separate shorts, since they could have tied together nicely into a feature. But ah well, they're not a feature, so I'm not including them as part of the regular list. But it would be weird not to talk about them here. So, The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar.
It's a very cute and whimsical tale, with its presentation serving as a true evolution of a cool stylistic choice from a movie I haven't talked about in the list yet. Oops. Yeah, this is a little awkward because I wrote most of the script before these shorts came out, and I don't really want to change it to accommodate them. So maybe just consider this middle chunk its own separate video that exists in a vacuum. I don't know, Wes's movies have plenty of stories that exist within stories, so this is thematically appropriate, I tell myself in order to do less work. Anyway, all of these stories are presented as if they're plays, with clear sets and stage crews moving everything along. Sometimes the stage crews even mess up a bit, which is such a cute detail. It really captures the amateur theater aesthetic. Okay, back on track. Henry Sugar. Its presentation is great, and it's very clear that Benedict Cumberbatch is a match made in heaven for Wes's style. But holy shit, Dev Patel really steals the show for me. His delivery is so funny, and he just seems so committed to his narration. I sincerely hope he comes back in every future Wes movie. Plus, Ralph Fiennes is back for the first time since Grand Budapest. Finally! He's so great to see in these. Overall, the only thing that really holds Henry Sugar back for me is that I feel like it's a bit too long, and the main culprit of that is the Ben Kingsley portion. He's really good, but his lengthy backstory doesn't really capture the same frantic energy as the parts where Dev Patel or Benedict Cumberbatch are taking center stage. I started to drift off before being jolted back with the second half, but overall, very good. The next day, we got The Swan. I can't stress enough how getting one of these a day for 4 days straight felt like I was attending a film festival in my own living room. It was kinda cool. Anyway, this one's pretty bleak and sad, with Rupert Friend just narrating an instance of his character getting bullied as a child. I was invested the whole way through, and it was pretty great overall. Next is The Ratcatcher, a pretty cute and wacky one. Though I really wish we got to see a stop-motion ferret instead of them just miming it. Just break the play rule and show it to us, Wes, you coward! The last one out of these is Poison, and I think they saved the best for last, personally. It's a great, tense little story where Dev Patel once again steals the show, and Eggs Benedict and the fake Mandarin are great too. I was not expecting Wes to pull out the shaky cam. An advantage of being so familiar with his style is that it really makes for an impactful moment whenever he breaks it. And man, I cannot stop thinking about that ending. Overall, my ranking of these shorts would be Poison, The Swan, The Ratcatcher, Henry Sugar. But they're all really good at least. Give them a watch on Netflix when you can. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention that Netflix is a website. And do you know where you can build websites? Squarespace! Ha! Bet you didn't know that, provided this is the first Schaeferless video you've ever watched. Anyway, yeah, it is Squarespace time. Let's go.
Squarespace is an amazing online website builder that enables you to create beautiful websites for your business or personal hobby. Create your own online store to sell your products. Whether they be physical, digital, or service products, you better believe Squarespace has the tools you need to start selling online. Hop on in with one of their professional website templates, with designs for every category and use case. Then make it your own by customizing the design, updating content, and adding whichever features you need. Any Squarespace template can do anything you want, allowing your idea, brand, or business to stand out. And on any device, too. You can even host video content using Squarespace, organizing your video library, showing off your content on beautiful video pages, and selling access to exclusive videos with member areas. The possibilities are near limitless. Check out squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Schaeferless to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
I love you, bitch.
Oh my god.
I ain't gonna never stop loving you, bitch.
Despite only being Wes's second film, Rushmore is a massive step up in terms of style from Bottle Rocket. We haven't reached maximum Wes yet, the sets are still very normal looking, and the shots, while creative and well done, aren't quite the feasts for the eyes that they are in his later work. But the element that really sticks out the most in this film as being extremely Wes-esque is the script. It's an incredibly hilarious and tightly written film. The characters are memorable, the story's fun, it's an all-around really good time. But I wouldn't quite put it in Anderson's top 3, like a lot of other lists I've seen do. Let's talk premise before we get into why. Basically, Jason Schwartzman plays an overambitious weirdo 15-year-old at a prep school, who befriends a local industrialist named Bill Murray. I love how quickly and efficiently this film establishes nearly everything you need to know about these characters. Jason Schwartzman's character Max is the subject of the first ever Wes Anderson comedic montage, patent pending, where we get to see the insane number of clubs he's involved in
rapid succession. Speaking of Succession, that's Brian Cox. What the hell? I didn't even recognize him till I saw his name in the credits. Anyway, he lets us know that Max is failing all his classes. A sharp contrast to how involved he makes himself in extracurriculars. This is all laid out for us in the first 7 minutes of the movie. It's just so tight and ergonomic. And the same goes for Bill Murray's character. We immediately understand that he doesn't really care about his meathead sons, and that Max is the son he wishes he had. We understand from a brief pool scene that his wife is unfaithful, and he hates his life in general. These two don't have a lot of people in their lives who really get them. But then they find each other. Wow, what could stand in the way of this friendship? Oh, there's this hot teacher lady they're both pining for. Yep, it's a love triangle, and one where a minor is after an adult. Look, I can stomach that sort of thing as long as the adult doesn't reciprocate the minor's feelings. Kids are gonna have crushes on teachers, especially freaky little weirdo incels like Max. But with that said, you're always gonna toe a fine line with creepy little incel protagonists. You should ideally either make the protagonist grow out of their incel phase, or just don't give them what they want at the end. And spoiler warning, skip to this time frame if you want to get to the next movie, that's kind of what we get. Max ends up with a girl his own age, and he's grown beyond his disturbing urges. That's all well and good, but the thing is, I really don't like how this teacher keeps giving him chances to be friends. Especially as his behavior gets worse and worse. Like, he tries to forcibly kiss her at one point, and somehow she doesn't completely cut ties with him forever after that. He shows up at her window pretending he got hit by a car, so okay, sure, she'll let him in and patch him up. But instead, she engages in conversation with him about why she dumped Bill Murray, tells him about her dead husband, and then lets him kiss her? What? I know she says that Max reminds her of her husband, and characters in movies don't always do the morally right thing. But this is still a pretty fucked up moment that the movie doesn't really scold either of these characters for. She only kicks him out of the house because she realizes it's fake blood, and even after this, and nearly getting sexually assaulted by him earlier, she still goes to his play at the end and dances with him. Dude, f this kid, pasty-ass sociopath. To be honest, I probably would have cut the near sexual assaults because it really put a damper on what, up until then, was an incredibly fun and engaging movie. It made me not really want to see this kid get redeemed by the end. Or if you want to keep that, fine, but then rework the ending so they don't reconcile. I don't know, both of these things together, I just don't vibe with. After this scene, the pacing takes a little bit of a hit too. Like right before we had a satisfyingly fast-paced revenge war between Max and Bill Murray. But then the movie kinda comes screeching to a halt for 20 minutes or so, presumably to show how much Max has lost control of his life. But I feel like it never really regains the momentum it had. It just kinda meanders a bit to an ending. Don't get me wrong, I think it's a great movie. Hell, the entire first half that culminates in that big revenge war was pretty much perfect for me. I just didn't think the second half matched its momentum, and there were some personal icks that left a bad taste in my mouth. Even so, this is an excellent early showcase for Wes Anderson's true abilities. Grounded in terms of visual style, yet brimming with inventive, quirky dialogue, and a fascinating central character. It's a great one to check out if you're not ready to be overloaded with the candy-coated visuals of Anderson's later work.
Fantastic.
Mr. Fox!
So, I take it Fantastic Mr. Fox is the movie that most of the people watching this video are most familiar with. Being an adaptation of a popular Roald Dahl children's book, Wes's only adaptation to date, in fact, this is a movie that's known and quite beloved by average moviegoers and cinephiles alike. And for good reason. This movie fucking rocks. It's fantastic. Mr. Fox, 2009. It somehow perfectly captures the whimsy of the original book and marries it to Wes's typical idiosyncrasies, making for one of the most fulfilling and impressive adaptations I've ever seen. Stop motion animation was always a natural step for such a meticulous filmmaker to take, and he nailed it on his first outing, giving us stunning sets, unique character designs, perfectly framed shots, the whole shebang. This is probably the orangest movie ever made, but you know what? It makes a great case for why that not super loved color is actually really damn gorgeous. The cast is also put to great use here, like Willem Dafoe as a nefarious southern rat. God, I love cinema. Jason Schwartzman does a great job as Mr. Fox's belittled and neglected son. Seriously, this character and his relationship with his dad is just Chicken Little but good. Wes actually got his brother, who cameoed in a lot of his previous films, to play a main role here as Christopherson, and he killed it. He's a natural fit for Wes's dialogue and tone.
Obviously, I guess. And for the leads, Wes stepped outside his actor comfort zone and brought in George Clooney and Meryl Streep as Mr. and Mrs. Fox. Both are so great. Clooney especially, who is so charismatic as this sly master thief, trying his best to go straight and stop Breaking Bad. Seriously, Mr. Fox somehow simultaneously gives off Walter White and Saul Goodman vibes. And that fact alone somehow makes me love this movie even more. I mean, I'm not crazy, right? He can't stop slipping and pulling scams just like Jimmy, and he did it for him rather than his family like Walter. Am I wrong? Okay, there's other good things in this movie. The writing is very dry and witty, the villains are threatening, the stakes are high, the score is unbelievably excellent, but it's the little details that really make this movie for me. Like, look at the digging animation these animals have. Look at how funny that looks. Look at how when they tunnel into each one of these 3 safe houses, they have the exact same dance animation every time. I am being charmed to heaven and back by the way this movie is animated. Ooh, what about when he's hiding behind the cider and the score is like do 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 do, or when the dogs and the farmer eat the sleepy blueberries and their eyes just get asterisks in them, or just the fucking shots of the possum staring blankly with swirls in his eyes. I am just obsessed with all of the tiny touches that add up and make this film so visually distinct from anything else I've ever seen. Isle of Dogs looks slightly better, yes, but I feel like there's just so many more visual flourishes to obsess over in Fantastic Mr. Fox. Is there anything that holds this movie back for me? Well, I guess I'd say that this doesn't really have my favorite characters out of any Wes Anderson movie. They're good, especially Mr. Fox, his possum buddy, and the goddamn Willem Dafoe rat. But none of them are quite as compelling as, say, Max from Rushmore or the Tenenbaums. Whenever I think about this movie, I think about how it looks. I think about the jokes and the score and the fucking swirly eyes on the possum. It's still good character-wise, but not the greatest. And it is kinda raw that Mrs. Fox never gets to do anything in the climax. I know Wes isn't exactly a paragon of writing female characters, but like, come on, give her something. But hey, this movie has a great story, great music, great humor, great animation style. It's just great. Oh no, I should have said fantastic for all those things. What was I thinking? This movie has a fantastic story, fantastic music. Never mind, the moment's passed. Whatever. Bottom line is, I am one of the biggest proponents of the Fantastic Mr. Fox agenda. I will maintain for the rest of time that it deserved Best Animated Feature and a Best Picture nomination far more than Up. Like, okay, Up can keep Best Score, fine. But does Up have a swirly-eyed fucking possum in it? Checkmate, liberals. What?
And we'll never be royal.
I've seen a lot of critiques of Anderson's films that claims he views his characters more as dolls he can rearrange in order to make something aesthetically pleasing and quirky, and less as actual people with genuine emotions and struggles. And like, I get how you can read these movies that way. They are pretty fantastical, and most of them don't necessarily pull on my heartstrings as much as they delight me with a silly, goofy misadventure. But there are some definite exceptions, and in my opinion, he's never made a more emotionally powerful film than The Royal Tenenbaums. It's goofy, don't get me wrong. It's also the true birthplace of his modern style. Despite only being his 3rd film, it's shot and edited in a way that's unmistakably Wes. He hasn't fully gone crazy with the colors and set design yet, but this is definitely the blueprint that all of his future films would build upon visually. On top of that, it's got a lot of funny moments. I mean, the premise is that it's a rich family where the deadbeat estranged dad is trying to reconnect with his 3 kids, who all pretty much peaked in middle school and haven't been able to replicate the success of their youth. There's a ton of great one-liners, and it's very Arrested Development-like, both in terms of the premise and the way some cutaway jokes are edited. So that's a plus. But like I said, the real reason this film sticks out so much compared to the others is that it really hits hard in a lot of places. For instance, one of the guys is in love with his sister. But she was adopted! Yeah, it's an incredibly messy situation, and they acknowledge it as such. But the mental toll it takes on this guy, the place he ends up, the goddamn bathroom scene, which like, I've just never seen anything edited or shot like that before, which makes it hit harder than it already does narratively. It's direction and script working hand in hand to give me something I'm never gonna get out of my head.
Then you got Ben Stiller losing his wife and becoming so obsessed with keeping his kids safe. I found myself a lot more invested in his grief than, say, Jason Schwartzman's in Asteroid City. He just seemed a lot more affected by it, and it was easier to connect with his emotions. Then there's the patriarch himself, Royal. It's pretty clear that he's a shit dad, and not a great person overall. But as the film goes on, his attempts to redeem himself become more and more genuine. There are some really hard-hitting lines I won't spoil. But yeah, they do the near impossible task of making you want this guy to reconnect with his family, even after all the shit he pulls. I also came to appreciate how this movie isn't really plot-based. There are some narrative threads, but it's mostly just a collection of great character moments, lovingly paced and tied together. It makes it so this is probably the strongest ensemble in any Wes Anderson movie. Nobody feels unfocused on. Everybody pretty much gets the perfect amount of screen time, and the performances and writing are also excellent. There's so many other nice details, like how they introduce characters through aesthetically pleasing covers of books they wrote, or the part transitions made to look like a book chapter that give you a taste of what's about to happen via text. It's just an amazing film through and through. And I think anyone can get something out of it. There's at least one character you'll find yourself connecting to, no matter who you are. What can I say? It's a fan favorite for a reason.
This is the story that'll make you a real reporter.
Alright, this is probably going to be my most controversial ranking on any of these lists. Aside from that Rio bullshit, I guess. But I'm just going to be totally honest. I adore The French Dispatch, more so than any other Wes Anderson film, with one exception. I scoured a ton of rankings, both from film journalists and Letterboxd users, and I couldn't find a single one that ranked French Dispatch so high. Hell, seeing it in the top half of a list was a rarity, and almost every reasoning given boils down to the same criticism. It's an anthology film consisting of 3 unrelated shorts. Of course it can't rank higher than movies that have a singular story, with themes and character arcs and all that jazz. This one's simple, and it's cutesy, and it's too all over the place by its nature as an anthology film. Look, I'm not gonna try and win you over to this film's side if it's not your thing. All I ask is that you respect my opinion that this is probably the single best directed film Wes has ever made. You can like the scripts and the characters of other films better. Hell, the script and characters of my #1 film are the reason it outdid this one. But purely from a directorial standpoint, this movie is insane. It goes beyond just having symmetry and nicely composed shots. It's one of the best examples of the intricacies and intimacy of live theater being captured on film. There are so many brilliant touches that feel like I'm watching a play, more so than the movie that's actually a play in universe. The way the set parts and rolls away as Zeffirelli and Juliet come together. The impeccable lighting and color as they remain stationary on a motorcycle, all as Timothée Chalamet waxes poetic. When the older Rosenthaler tags in for the younger one in prison, a far more powerful reflection of the passage of time than digitally de-aging actors could ever be. The montage depicting the places Rosenthaler's painting went, where everyone tries to hold freeze frames of a dynamic scene and slightly moves back and forth. Most directors would have just taken a still picture of these shots so the actors stayed completely still. But it's these slight movements, these little imperfections, that breathe so much life into the concept of this shot. It's like, yes, this is one of the purest instances of theater I've ever seen captured on film. And yes, this film is so memorable and distinct primarily because of its visuals. But like, film is a visual medium, man. I don't know what to tell ya. And like, obviously Anderson has written more in-depth stories and characters in the past, compared to what these 3 shorts are able to provide. But like, even though they're short, I don't know, I still love these 3 stories and their characters. Benicio del Toro as a literal tortured artist struggling to find the will to keep creating while in prison, all as an ultra slimy Adrian Brody tries to exploit his talent for financial gain. That's great! That's a great ass story! This entire movie deserves to exist just for the wheelchair chase scene alone. Like, tell me you didn't crack at least a smile at that. On its own, this is a perfectly plotted short that I don't really have any problems with.
The second one can get bogged down by a slightly weird and confusing premise. Like, why are the police playing chess with these protesting boys? Is that like an actual thing in real life, or is it just a quirky Wes Andersonism? But ultimately, it's a wonderful story about Timothée Chalamet bumbling his way into becoming a revolutionary icon. I love his ego about his writing, and the relationships he forms with the women in his life. It's so entertaining. And then there's the final story. Jeffrey Wright kills it, recounting a tale about how he got caught up in a hostage situation where the police chief's son was kidnapped. It's tense and absurd at the same time. A crazy act to balance. The way it all culminates with that animated segment is great, and nothing makes me laugh harder than the part where they all get out of their cars, chase each other on foot, and then end up back where their cars are only to get back in them and keep driving. Just sheer gold. I previously found the final story to veer a little too far into absurdism, with all these kidnappers willingly eating the food prepared for them by the people they're trying to get a ransom out of. But I don't know, I changed my mind. The absurdism is just right. And I like the conclusion of the story where Bill Murray and Jeffrey Wright argue about the point of it. It seems like Jeffrey Wright just wanted to tell a fun escapade, even going so far as to leave out the most emotional bit of the story, that being the connection he forms with the chef since they're both foreigners. I think there's some really interesting commentary here on the idea of just wanting to tell a fun little story with no deeper meaning versus finding ways to derive meaning and powerful emotion out of something that didn't seem to have it at first glance. It's a wonderful little scene, and probably the best Wes has ever gotten at writing a distinctly non-white perspective. I really hope he builds upon it in his future films. Overall, I would rank the first story as the best, then the third, then the second. All bangers all the time though. I'll give the first story a 10 and the last two a 9. So ultimately, while it lacks a lot of the thematic depth that enhances a ton of other Wes films, it's just impeccably entertaining from a visual and writing perspective. It's hard to say if it's underrated in the same way something like Darjeeling Limited is, because a lot of people just can't get as invested in a collection of short films as they can a fully fleshed out narrative feature. But I don't think the kind of film this is a valid reason to dismiss it out of hand. The characters are still interesting and endearing, the stories are still engaging, and the visuals are flat out insane. I never get tired of this movie no matter how many times I see it. And that sentiment is also true for my number one pick. I'm actually about to pass out, it's so hot in here. Ooh, I need food. But I gotta finish this first. Am I crazy, or does the elevator attendant in this movie look like Doug Walker? Seriously, I think I'm onto something here. Anyway, I'm gonna be totally honest, nothing else even stood a chance at the number one spot. The Grand Budapest Hotel is one of my top 15 favorite movies of all time. Maybe even top 10. It's a masterpiece. I love it. My whole family loves it. We watched it all the time. We would nickname Patrick Lobby Boy solely because of this movie. I've seen it more times than I can count, and you know what? I haven't seen it nearly enough. Spreading the word about this movie to more people was honestly one of my main motivations for making this entire video. The Grand Budapest Hotel is Wes Anderson's most complete film. It's not his best looking live action film, that's French Dispatch. It's not his most emotionally resonant film, that's Royal Tenenbaums. But it manages to come in second place in both categories. And doing so is what makes it his strongest overall package. The sets and costumes contribute to this colorful, candy-coated wonderland, with some of the most delectably memorable shots any movie has ever graced me with. And there's strong emotion as you get swept up in the lives of these wonderful characters, trying to uncover a murder conspiracy amidst the backdrop of creeping fascism. Among the usual delightful Wes Anderson absurdity, you feel the struggles of our two leads and you feel the bonds they form. And said leads are perhaps this movie's greatest strength. My favorite character in any Wes Anderson film is Monsieur Gustave, played by Ralph Fiennes in my absolute favorite role of his. A delightfully flamboyant and saucy concierge with a heart of gold. He's equal parts hilarious and heartwarming. You love to see him gradually break his veneer of pretension to reveal the soft-hearted man buried deep down. All of which comes out as he grows more attached to his lobby boy, Zero. Before Tony Revolori walked in front of a bad green screen effect in Spider-Man No Way Home, his breakout role was the plucky and ever so loyal closest confidant to Gustave. I could watch these two go on quirky misadventures forever. They're both so endearing and have such great chemistry. But by some miracle, my favorite Wes Anderson characters have also been paired with my favorite Wes Anderson story. His most ambitious and adventurous to date, in fact. There's murder, betrayal, shootouts, ski chases, prison breaks, delicious pastries, Willem Dafoe is the scariest fucking bounty hunter in all of cinema. And not only is this his most exciting story, it's also his funniest film by far. His other movies have plenty of great comedic moments, but with this one, oh my god, every other minute something is making you laugh. It's got some of the best jokes I've seen in anything, honestly.
Where's Celine? What? She's dead. We're reading her will. Oh, yes, of course.
Like, seriously, if you assumed Wes Anderson movies were too artsy or pretentious for you, you really gotta check this one out. It's a straight up buddy comedy adventure, just with far more witty writing than that genre is accustomed to. I know I've been mainly talking about how fun it is, but it's not devoid of substance either. It's got a wonderful multi-layered framing device that subtly shows off how wonderful it is to pass stories down through the generations. We also get to experience the pain Zero feels recounting this tale without fully knowing why it's so painful for him yet. A wonderful and intriguing hook. And of course, we get to see firsthand how fascism strips institutions like the Grand Budapest of their soul, and ultimately results in other tragedies over the course of the film. It's a movie as rich with meaning and nuanced tragedy as it is with laugh-out-loud moments, essentially offering everything you could possibly want out of a movie. The story is exciting, the cinematography is stunning, the sets are immaculate, the characters are amazing, the score slaps, it's funny, it's sad. I could rewatch it any day of the week and still have a good time. It's the goddamn Grand Budapest Hotel. My pick for the greatest Wes Anderson movie ever made. And that's my Wes Anderson ranking. I once again can't express enough just how much of an absolute delight this video was. Just 11 incredibly well-made movies that range from okay to one of my favorite movies of all time. No duds, no torture. I could really get used to good movie rankings. I really hope I encourage some of you guys to check out some awesome films that you haven't seen yet. And whether you've seen them or not, I hope I made you see why Wes Anderson is one of my favorite film directors of all time. I love every idiosyncrasy, every deliberate shot, every vivid color palette. No one is making movies like his, and having a director this unique with this much of an artistic vision is so worthwhile to the craft of cinema. And his uniquely dry and witty writing style complements his exquisite eye for visuals so well. As long as he keeps making movies, I'll keep seeing them on the biggest theater screen I can find. And you should too, if you haven't already. Good night, Tri-State area.